Good morning, Yorkshire Classic Cars Limited fan. Welcome to a really sunny day in Retford, another sunny day in Retford. It's beautiful, and welcome to the Yorkshire Classic Cars Limited YouTube channel. I love saying that. I'm laughing to myself. It's something and nothing. Time to chop the sill off the Rover. I just did a really weird, funny intro, and it just all went completely pear-shaped. But basically, if you saw the first video, I aligned the doors. Absolutely crucial before you start cutting a car up. I'm about to start cutting it up and repairing the inner sill. Okie dokie, off we go. So I'll have to apologise. I've just done this off camera. As you can see by the bits of old steel sort of flapping around. I do this kind of with what I've got. It's not a set job. So what I've done is I've braced the doors. Now the doors are happy, or I'm happy with the doors, is probably a better expression. I've taken them back off again. I've put them up there, sat on top of that shelf. And what I've done is brace the door apertures. Now, when I'm bracing stuff, I tend to do it, I overdo it a little bit. Because quite honestly, you're better to overdo it and it take 15, 20 minutes here than, you know, completely ruin the job and then end up having to redo it. And it takes longer in the long run, basically. It's better just to do it a little bit better. So what I've done is I've braced to the inner sill. Obviously, that's staying where it is. It's good, it's strong, it's solid. As you can see where I've cleaned it up. I will have to unpick this weld a little here to put the new sill in, but that gives me a good datum line there, and it is welded here and here, here and here, and then that once this is cut off here, I should be able to just break those off. I've tied those together. So I've triangulated them in two directions so that this can't move, the B pillar, and nor can the A pillar. Now then, the A pillar is very, very strong on this car. You can see how it's tied into the sill and into the inner sill and the firewall, you know, the bulkhead and everything, the wing. I am going to cut the bottom off the wing in a minute. I've also triangulated to the floor. Now, I know you're probably thinking, well, the floor will just move. It'll just wiggle about. There's no good there. But there is actually, what we probably can't see is there's a cross member here. There's some spot welds where my finger is. And there's a big outrigger under there. So that's really strong, is that. So that's just another reference point. And then the back section, I've just put a spreader bar in. This is just it's all just thin old bits of box section. I think this is an old bed or something. I can't even remember. But it's just tied into this seam here and this seam here, but I've also tied it into this section here. Okay, so that's sort of all tied together with this. Stop it twisting with that. Now, the reason I haven't gone to the extent of triangulating down to the inner sill here is this cross member here, excuse me, that goes under the seat is a very strong section. That isn't moving. And I don't need to cut into it. If I do, I'll add extra bracing, but I'd be really surprised. The seat base here is tied into the inner sill, and the rear arch here is all tied into it and everything. And this is all good and solid, so there's no chance really of that moving, certainly not significantly. So that's why I've done that. I do have to cut, the new sill is laid underneath, obviously. And I've had a quick look while I got it out of the box. I've got to cut across here. This piece stays in place and the sill goes under back. Same here, except for I don't know what's gone on there with the primer, but we'll sort that out in a minute. And then there's a cut somewhere over here. Now, I'm struggling to see where that cut actually is. That piece goes over the top, and where they've brought it in here, I'm not sure. So initially, I think it's here. There feels to be a seam there. So what I'll do is I'll cut across here initially, and then I'll be able to see from underneath where to trim back. So the next stage really is to get her up on axle stands, jack stands if you're an American. I'm going to put those under the suspension, so the weight is on the suspension. And then the next step is to basically just start chopping out that sill and see what we've got behind it. Right, so what you've just seen me do is weld that section in there. Now, when I say weld that section in, I've only put a little run across the top, and I appreciate it's an absolute mess. The reason for that is I had a massive gap along there, but I didn't want to do any burn throughs. Ironically, the original steel weld's nicer than the new steel, which is ironic, really, to be honest with you. The shape is being pulled a little bit. It's pulled it out of this corner, it's pulled it here. And I do need to spend some time making sure that shape is correct, because once I've welded this section in, it's going to be really strong. So pulling it to the sill then is going to be difficult. So this needs a little bit of adjustment before I get too far, because if I tie lots and lots into that and lots of shape into it that's wrong, then getting it to meet that sill is going to be near impossible. So as you can see, there's like a dimple here. This is round where this bar here bolts on here. So the back of the rubber bushing is there. What I'm going to do is I'm going to keep cleaning this out. I'm still unsure how to do this, because obviously I need to retain the location for these. So what I'm thinking is cut down to here and cut one section of it out, drill the hole through, and leave that absolutely dog tight. And then once I've drilled that hole, I can then cut that out and drill that hole and weld a section down here. I'm going to cut all that out in one piece. This is the only shaped part. All the rest of it is absolutely straight as an arrow. So that's dead easy. But it's just keeping the shape right. Obviously, I haven't looked at the back of that, but I can feel it feels a nice smooth piece on the back. However, if I do need to weld along the edge of it when the suspension's off, later on, once the sill's all done, I can just weld down the back of it and grind it back. It will burn the paint off inside, but unfortunately, that's the nature of the beast. But once I've got this in the right place, I'm quite happy to take that arm off should I need to. So I can't, if I take this arm off now, all the axle will move and it won't necessarily be back in the right place. So if I drill that and the axle's off on this side, all the tracking and alignment at the back will be wrong. So I'm just going to work out what I'm going to do next there. I appreciate this looks a little bit messy. Usually I weld on a higher heat than that. I welded that on number 3. I ended up welding over the top of it on number 4 at the end. I usually use number 4, especially on thicknesses like this, out of 7. So that's above half current on a low wire speed. And that makes a very nice, neat, straight weld. Excuse me. Unfortunately, because this is, there was a big gap. The gap at the edge had moved a little bit, which comes back to me saying set your sections up perfectly every time. Then that left me with a little bit of a quandary there, because I've got quite about a 2mm gap, and I dare go in with a number 4 in case it burnt the edge away and made a mess, because then you've got all those bits of wire sticking out the other side and the like, and it looks awful. So I went down a little bit, which meant it did weld very nicely where the gaps were and where I hadn't welded previously, but where the thickness of the metal was increasing, it made it a little more difficult. So what I'm going to do is work out what I'm going to do here next. Right, so excuse me here. I haven't put the microphone on the camera because I just can't be bothered. Sorry and all that. As you can see, I put this piece in here. I've shaped it to follow this contour here, but the bottom here stays flat all the way down to this dip here, which I've also put in there. You'll have seen me weld across here, and I'm in the appallingness of how untidy it was. Some of it's part ground off, but as you can see, it is a good seam I've made. Now, what I've done with the cutting this, what I've done with the welder, sorry, is, to be honest, some of it's messy because I forgot I was welding mil and a half to mil and a half and mil and a half behind it, so like nearly 4 mil of steel there. So I had to turn the welder up in between times to try and get a neat weld, and I went up to number 5, which is a lot, big amps. And then what I've done is to grind back my embarrassment, and I will do a little more here because there's a little bit of a lump I can feel there. I'll make a piece now to go across here, and this piece goes right down to the bottom of the sill. Now, to do that, if you've watched me the video on the stag door, what I did was clamp a piece of solid steel across the back, and I'm going to do the same here wherever I can behind this Rover sill, to make sure that is square to this, because once I've laminated this piece on top and spot welded it through, it's going to be seriously strong. I won't be putting the roll into it purely because I just can't form that neatly. I'll put a divot in it, and then these are the 2 holes for this section that I cut out. Those go on, oops, excuse me, that way. Okay, no, sorry, wrong way up still. That way. Oh goodness me, sorry. That way. I used an 8mm drill bit because obviously the thickness of the threads in there is more. If I'd have gone 10, would have just taken the threads out anyway, so there's no point in that. So I followed those as a guide, and as you can see, when you put that up, it is perfectly in line. I'll go through those with a 10. I'll just clean any burrs off here, put my new section on, drill these back through the other way before I weld it on, and weld my captive nuts to it before I weld it on. I've also, if you'll note, I've taken note of the line of the sill under there. I may need to just clean this edge off a little more, but again, if I put a straight edge on that when it's finished, you can use that just to make sure your sill line is the same all the way down. My only concern at the moment is this shape here, because the sill is a funny shape there. There's also a step in the sill here, but that's to allow for this reinforcing section. So what I'm going to do now is, before the end of this video, I'll make that piece to go in there. The welder will go along this edge that I've just used with the angle grinder on. Use the angle grinder on to make smooth and flat, so it sits flat against the panel. I'll just clean this a little more here. But as you can see now, it's becoming a solid section. And although I don't like making little pieces like this, quite honestly, it does retain the shape and everything, and it keeps your shape correct, which is essential at this stage, because it's not going to work if I've got to faff about trying to make it fit the sill after I've strengthened it all up. So I'll make that piece now. Again, 1.5mm thick steel. I'll get the nuts welded to it, and then you'll see me weld it in, grind it back, and then that's it for today. I think it's starting to get dark outside, so that is that. Okie dokie. Right, so I'm going to draw this video to a hasty close. It's getting dark outside. It's well past 5 o'clock. So I appreciate that still looks a little teeny tiny bit scruffy. You can see there's been a bit of galvanisation in that steel. I don't know where that's coming from, but it's there. As you can see, I've seam welded right across here now. This is where I ground back and cut that line nice and neat across. So I trace that line with this panel. It matches here, just needs grinding back. I've taken off the captive nuts and drilled through and put those on. They aren't welded on as yet. I've only put those there to protect the threads. Excuse me, I was going to weld those on first, but I've decided that what I'm going to do is grind all this back first, and then just put these on in situ rather than doing them on the bench. I'm going to spot weld into this like that, but you can see the panel here has been spot welded into sort of randomly, it appears, but it won't be. It'll be 1 here, 2 here, 1 here, 2 here, and so on. There'll be some sort of a pattern with it, but I'm going to take the liberty of not doing that here. So this part I will, because I've checked that with the sill and that fits really, really nice to the sill. This part still, I'm not really sure of the shape that it needs to be. It does need to change a little bit, so I'm going to leave that unwelded for now until I've got the sill cut and sill fitted and ready to rock and roll. That will then give me a better idea of the shape. I obviously can't pull to the sill because the sill is thinner, and this will be 1/8 of an inch thick once I've welded those two together, and way too strong to move after that without the help of a big hammer. So forming it to shapes will be difficult. I think the shape is close, but I just want to confirm that before I spot weld it. Once I'm happy with the sill lining to it, I'll then spot weld it and drill it before I paint it or repaint it, whichever. This bottom edge just needs cutting off flush with this panel. I'll do that from behind. I'll lay it on my back, panting and sweating, and then the next job is to continue along here and replace this section here. Obviously you can see I haven't undone all this, purely because there's absolutely no point. I'm going to be cutting it off anyway when I get rid of this section. There's also a hole appeared here. This is naughty, so God knows what's going on there, because I certainly don't. But this next section has a slight fold in it, as you should be able to see there, and that goes over this piece. So that will then be, I'll leave a gap here and seam weld across there, so all three pieces are welded together, lovely, and then continue on, and that will form a good strong sill connection and suspension bracket there. Okay, so that is really nice and thick and stable. The sill line appears good here, and as I said before, I will clamp everything together with a piece of flat bar, or piece of box section, sorry, before I weld any of that together here, just to make sure it all pulls in. And I'll show you that in the next video, which will be following on from this one. Obviously the next video will be finishing that other section. I may finish that and then show you once I've done it, and getting this unstitched is probably the expression. Because it's been welded before, I don't really know how I'm going to do that as yet. I don't want to make any snap decisions. You'll find if you're ever doing this yourself, you do need to sometimes stop and think. There's often a better solution than the initial solution you're doing with. Sometimes you go back to that solution. I'm not saying there's always a better solution, there isn't. And then I'll look at unzipping the front wing and repairing anything at that end. But I'm hoping, touch wood, that once I've done this section here, there are some stringers and gussets underneath that will need to be unstitched. So doing that section here, and then starting on the front section tomorrow, and then looking at getting the sill actually fitted into the car. Okie dokie. Please like and subscribe. I'm on with the Stag. Once I've done this sill, I'll be doing the sill on the Stag and offsetting it. So yeah, please take a look at my other fabrication videos and give it all a like if you've enjoyed it. Thank you. Bye bye.